We are just like very different from that, it seems. Going over my head, but I'm trying my best to understand this.
Our school system is pretty much like, it's pretty much just making workers.
Politics, they make my brain hurt sometimes.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at a video called America is Not Europe. I don't really know much about this at all. I think it's just going to be another one of those comparison videos, which are always really interesting to watch.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get kind of repetitious because we've done several of them, but
we keep finding new things, it seems.
Yeah, we always find new things. And so yeah, that's what we're doing here today. If you guys like this type of content, please like, share, and subscribe. Turn the notification bell on. Do all that good jazzy YouTube stuff. And let's get into it and check it out.
I was born and grew up in Denmark. And these are countries where the government spends taxes and spends approximately twice the level of the United States. Mm-hmm. And while I am very sympathetic to many of your spending proposals, especially on the things you mentioned on early childhood and single payer and the like, I also know that these are countries that heavily tax everybody, not just the rich people. Middle classes, they have consumption taxes on everything of 20%. So while I'm very sympathetic to what you say, my sense is still that you would like to spend as a Scandinavian, but not tax as one. Is that correct?
We have, the answer is, and you raised some very good points.
Comparing the U.S. with Europe.
Just in case you didn't know, that was Bernie Sanders.
I was going to say, I recognized it. I kept thinking, what is his name? Bernie Sanders. I think it's Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I forget what state he is, senator, but he's usually considered like the most socialist senator we have, I think.
Yeah.
So he's very much like on like taxing the wealthy and sharing wealth and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Comparing the U.S. with Europe and countries in Europe would be naive, oversimplistic, and offend a bunch of people. Land masses are complex. But I'm going to go ahead and compare them anyways, because some of the comparisons between Europe and the U.S. remain way too superficial.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
It's not uncommon to obsess over the usual suspects for why the U.S. is less equal than Europe and also has less good quality, affordable social programs. The analysis is simple. The U.S. has more billionaires and taxes them less. Europe has less billionaires, but taxes them more. Need a larger tax base to fund popular social programs and also less inequality? Just raise the taxes on the rich, like the Europeans do. Now, although the tax rates for rich people explain some part of the difference, it doesn't explain enough. Europeans can afford good social programs because a lot of Europeans pay a lot for them, mainly through indirect taxes. And Europeans are also more equal before taxes even factored in because a lot of the social programs they pay more for also reduce pre-tax inequality. But the US has, so far, been unable to adopt the same. Why? Well, in part because taxing the wealthiest of society is easier to advertise and justify than taxing everybody a lot more. In Europe, most people...
That is very true, because like everything is like, oh, tax the rich,
Because they can afford it, but then it's like...
Well, the U.S., I think, does have the most billionaires per capita.
Yeah.
And like the amount of millionaires, I think I saw some stat, like there's 18 million millionaires in the U.S. Now, again, I don't know, like, compared to, like, population, all that stuff, like, what it would equate to in other countries, but
right.
there is a ton of rich people that live. And, again, I just did an econ class, so we did kind of talk a lot about this, and it's like, yeah, you can tax the rich more, and maybe you should, but you also don't want to tax them too much that they go to a different country, take all those jobs and industry with them too.
Right,
so there's like a fine line on doing it. But there is also the thing that we also do give them a ton of tax write-offs. Like you can make a salary of like $100,000, but then you get like so many stocks, or you own so much of the company. So technically you're worth like $100 million, but because you haven't sold your assets and stuff, you don't get taxed on that. So
right, so you're not actually that
There's
rich.
a ton of loopholes that I feel like the rich know and they go through. And I don't exactly blame them, like, if those loopholes are there. I mean, but it is one of those, like, touchy subjects for sure.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because you mentioned, if you tax them too much, they might leave the country. Well, that kind of happened a little bit, but not so much leave the country because all of our states have different tax laws. And so I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, but you know how Tesla was in California. Didn't like how he was getting taxed and stuff, so he moved to Texas where they have no income tax.
There's a lot of companies that moved from California to Texas because
and
California...
that's just in the last few years.
But it's interesting. I will say, like, California has the highest tax rate, but I think it's only at 14%.
Oh, so it's still not that
compared
high.
to anyway, we'll continue. But
In Europe, most people don't really need to be convinced about paying for their welfare states because it works sufficiently for most of them. But in the US, there's an intimate struggle
that was the French president, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Right. I actually don't know if he's still in power, but I know he was the French president.
states because it works sufficiently for most of them. But in the US, there's an intimate struggle with deciding whether pre-distribution will be a state, local, or federal solution.
Yeah.
Part of the reason is that in the US, the federal government gets the most media attention, while state and local governments can avoid scrutiny. This means that minimum wage hikes in the US are practically always seen as a responsibility for the federal government, which has to delicately balance different costs of living, like laborers living in New York City and miners living in West Virginia. In Europe, though, a country like France or Denmark can opt for different geographically sensitive policy while also being held more directly into account because the assignment of responsibility is clearer to its citizens.
There's this definition of a wicked problem, which is circulating around in the literature, which suggests that a wicked problem is wicked if it has so many dimensions to it that you can't go at one angle to the problem and try to fix it. And I think school finance is like that. So school districts get money from their local communities in the form of property taxes. They'll also get money from the state, and the state might give them money through multiple formulas. And then a portion, a much smaller portion, about 9 or 10%, comes from the federal government. So even if you tried to solve the problem at, say, the state level, there are these other funding sources that come with their own restrictions, which ultimately affect how the money gets used in schools.
Yeah, that is one thing. It's like each state is can act like its own country.
Yeah.
Because that's how the U.S. was really founded. It was
Meant to be that way.
It was meant to be like a lot more states' rights than like the federal government overseeing everything.
Yeah.
So then you have you have the community level. Mm-hmm. So you have like your school board committee and all that. Like county. Yeah, it goes from like city, county, state, federal. And I know England and other countries have a very relatively similar system. Yeah. I will say one thing, because I know like a lot of European countries paid less for jobs.
Oh, okay.
Like comparatively to the U.S. So the U.S. you're making more, but I think some people have actually done breakdowns and shown that if you look at what they're getting out of it with like the universal health care, education,
they're getting taxed so much more, but it's actually benefiting them
exactly.
because of it.
And a lot of people, I feel like,
so their cost of living isn't quite the same as ours because of that too.
Yeah, there's a lot more. There might be some more subsidies. Again, guys, comment down below. Let us know if we're just totally wrong.
Please help me. I am like struggling a little bit trying to follow along. You're a little bit more politically in tune than I am.
Well, it's not just politics.
This is like going over my head, but I'm trying my best to understand this.
From my understanding of Europe, it's like, yes, you make less, but in reality, you're almost making more, especially when you include like time off and stuff.
Okay.
You know, like 6 weeks,
well, yeah.
8 weeks. I mean, that's all paid. Anyway, guys, the American mindset is just all about the dollar, like what you bring home.
Right.
But in reality, it's like it would probably be better if like more taxes, if the taxes were used properly.
Yes.
I would rather pay extra in taxes than have like universal health care.
Yeah.
And then my money, I might be spending more.
Yeah.
Because it's not subsidized for my own health insurance as opposed to, if everyone pitched in together.
Which is crazy expensive too.
In Connecticut, a U.S. state, a school in Bridgeport will be poorer by virtue of being surrounded by poor properties, while a school in Greenwich will be richer because it is surrounded by richer properties. This is because local taxes are largely funded by property values in the area. However, this concept fails to explain everything. Educational disparities also exist across Europe and within its countries. The U.S. is not unique for having a system that predisposes poor children to poorer resources. Education systems are complex. Finland is not the same as Sweden, and resources invested in education and the quality that follows does not seem like a linear relationship. The U.S.'s unique situation is that its quality does not match the amount that the U.S. actually spends on it. One of the problems with answering why resources don't match the quality you would expect in the U.S. is because the decentralized nature of school districts makes it pretty difficult to actually identify what spending works and what doesn't. Overall, there are some indications that, compared with Europe, the amount of staffing, the associated health and retirement benefits, alongside transportation, all add up to more costs for the American education system.
Yeah, because a lot of, transportation is a good point because overseas they just take public transportation because it's so readily available, so it's no extra cost. Where here, a lot of kids have to do school buses or have to have their parents drive them that extra bit because we're usually a lot further away from everything.
Yeah. Well,
so that's like a whole nother expense that's not even an issue over there.
Well, it's not just that. I know I've heard, the U.S. teachers are paid kind of low. Mm-hmm. Like, they really are. I don't know enough about the U.S. school system to
This is hard coming coming from a couple of homeschoolers.
Well, I just haven't had to deal with it too much, but I know there is some interesting bills in some states called, there's a school choice bill, which I actually personally do support because it will allow, right now we're locked into school districts, so where you live, you can only go to the school in that district. School choice will allow you to choose what school your child can go to. Now, yes, you might have to drive further for it, you might have to pay some subsidy, or you might have to pay some to be able to do that, but you can send your kid to the nicer school, even if you live in a poor community. And then there's also the thing of actually giving the parents back the taxpayer money, like your tax money, and then you can choose to do that with what you want. It has to be school related.
Yeah.
But if that were to pass, then you could use that tax money that's given back to you to pay for the gas and the tuition, even for potentially like a private school. And so it could be really good, I think.
And I think it also incentivizes schools to do better because, like, hey, we're losing students because we're not keeping up with
what it will do is it will allow for competition because it can be like, hey, I'm going to take my tax dollars and I'm going to drive an extra 30 minutes for my kids to get the better schooling at the more expensive school.
Alongside transportation, all add up to more cost for the American education system. But the differences don't end there.
In the 1990s, as the crime rate was plummeting, as American life was getting safer and safer, Americans freaked out and thought that if they take their eyes off their children, the children will be abducted. Now, this goes back, the fear was stoked by cable TV in the 1980s. There were a few high-profile abductions. But it's not until the 1990s that we really start locking kids up and saying, you cannot be outside until you're 14 or 15. We took this essential period of childhood from about 8 to 12, when kids throughout history have practiced independence, have gotten into adventures, have made rafts and floated down the Mississippi River. We took that period and said, you don't get to practice independence until it's too late, until that period is over.
Okay, that's actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that because that is something.
I didn't know this was a thing.
Well, no. Seriously, think about it. Like recesses, they're all fenced off.
Yeah.
They're only allowed like 30 minutes. Like our school system, I'm not again for sure how other countries are. Our school system is pretty much like centered around. It's pretty much just making workers. It's not like really open. It's not really encouraging imagination too much.
Right. It's like, this is what you do. Follow your.
Well, no. You show up to school. You work. You're there for 8 hours a day.
Very scheduled. Like then do this.
It's pretty much exactly like a work schedule. You get a 30-minute lunch. You have recess. You eat in cafeteria. All that, everything's together. I think Finland, some of the Nordic countries are very much different. Like in the younger years. Like they encourage them, like they're outside in the woods, and the teachers are like walking them around through the public and.
Oh.
It's a total,
like not even on school grounds.
No, it's like a total. I've seen some videos of it, and it's like there's as they get older, obviously, then you really need to focus on like your math, reading, all that stuff. But when they're younger, they allow them just to like their imagination, just to
enjoy things.
Yeah, they allow them to enjoy. I don't know what I'm trying to say. They allow them to be kids, pretty much.
Okay.
Whereas I feel like the American school system, especially with like all the fencing, and if you ever notice, the old schools used to have these massive windows everywhere, but all the new schools are like super small windows that can't open. And yes, I do know that is partly due to like gun violence in schools and stuff. But at the same time, there is, there's just this constant fear.
It feels a little more like a prison, though, because it closes everything off.
Well, there is just
a friendly environment.
There is just a constant fear, like, if you lose sight of your kid in public for, like, a few minutes, like, oh, shoot, does someone take them?
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is.
Because of all the abductions.
Well, I just don't know statistically if that's actually true or not.
I don't know.
But
I know there's a lot, but I don't...
I mean, I would rather be safe than sorry.
Yeah,
but it's,
of course.
like, I don't know.
Sad that we have to be worrying about that.
Kids in the US are raised differently than kids in Europe. Some blame the planning that produced more isolated American families, some the over-paranoia towards kidnapping in the 1980s, and others point to an increasingly competitive environment where parents try to give their children an edge over the others by helicoptering them. It's really not that far a stretch to say that many European children could be considered to have more freedom at an earlier age. American children are less likely to be able to walk to school alone compared with European children, which you can of course connect to overall crime rates, and authoritative school policy is still much more accepted across the US than it is in Europe.
19 states have corporal punishment?
Is corporal punishment
like spanking, I think spanking or...
That's allowed, but some states aren't?
I seem to remember something in the news that there was this case, I think in Arkansas, that like the school district actually did spank the child. Like they had permission from the parents or something, but it was kind of like, okay, this is kind of weird.
school policy is still much more accepted across the U.S. than it is in Europe.
So, the real key to the distinctiveness of America is the structure of our government. One part of it, of course, is the independence of the judiciary. But there's a lot more. There are very few countries in the world, for example, that have a bicameral legislature. Oh, England has a House of Lords for the time being, but the House of Lords has no substantial power. They can just make the Commons pass a bill a second time. France has a Senate, it's honorific. Italy has a Senate, it's honorific. Very few countries have two separate bodies in the legislature equally powerful. That's a lot of trouble, as you gentlemen doubtless know, to get the same language through two different bodies elected in a different fashion. Very few countries in the world have a separately elected chief executive. Sometimes I go to Europe to talk about separation of powers. And when I get there, I find that all I'm talking about is independence of the judiciary, because the Europeans don't even try to divide the two political powers, the two political branches, the legislature and the chief executive. In all of the parliamentary countries, the chief executive is the creature of the legislature. There's never any disagreement between them and the prime minister, as there is sometimes between you and the president. When there's a disagreement, they just kick him out. They have a no confidence vote, a new election, and they get a prime minister who agrees with the legislature.
I haven't really studied foreign government, so I don't know what I'm assuming he knows what he's talking about. Anyways, again, you're going to have to let us know down below.
I'm not sure I understood much of that.
Well, no, he's talking about, I don't know how much it would affect the school choice, but probably does. So, something like if a bill's proposed, it has to be approved by the House of Representatives.
Okay.
And then it goes to the Senate, which they're a totally separate body of government.
Okay.
And then they have to approve it, and then it goes up to, this is for the federal, and then it has to go up to then the president has to decide if they're going to veto it or not, and sign it into law.
Okay.
So, like, right now, he was talking about a two-party system. I feel like a lot of other countries have more than two parties, so there's a little bit more
maybe
diversity.
They don't hold the same power.
Well, I don't know if it's majority or how that works.
Was he basically saying, like, we're kind of behind because we have to go through so many levels to
He
get
was saying
anything
it's
done?
a lot harder. Yeah, he was bringing up the fact that it's a lot harder for the U.S. to get new bills and propositions through because it has to pass through
so many
all
layers.
these bodies, different bodies of government, and they're usually...
And then there's usually conflict.
Well, it's usually split 50-50, roughly 50-50 it seems, especially nowadays, and so it's pretty much like...
Nothing really gets done.
Pretty much like, right now, the Republicans have control of the House of Representatives, so they can pass what they want, but then the Senate is controlled by the Democrats, so they just cancel whatever the representatives do. So the only time that there really is stuff that can happen is when the party has control of all three branches of government, which does happen, I think, usually within the first...
But then that's sometimes an issue because then they monopolize everything and then they just boom, 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 get as
Yeah,
much
sometimes,
as they can. So
but
there's issues everywhere.
if you want stuff passed, you need to have control of all three branches.
Politics, they make my brain hurt sometimes.
Agrees with
The difference is simple. European countries are mainly nations, not federations. A European state, if it existed, could never be the same as the U.S. Written in their constitution, U.S. states are modeled after the federal government, and state governments, which mirror the one above, usually have their own Chamber of Representatives, a Senate, and also have an executive mirrored after their president.
Even I was describing the federal, but you also, again, have that exact same thing in the state level.
Yeah.
So it's just constant, it just keeps trickling down, the many, many versions. Like, a city's very similar, and then, again, you take it to the state.
It's like same...
style. Like, the state government, they have their own representatives, they have their own senators, they have their own governor, who is pretty much like the president.
Just because you can't have the president run every little small town as well.
No,
you have to have someone in
that.
charge of everything, but it's the same kind of hierarchy system.
But I'm curious on this because I do know that, England has councils and...
Lower branches of government?
Yeah, they have lower branches of government. They have, their city... and townships and cities.
But maybe they don't hold the same standards. Like, maybe
I
everything
don't know,
is
guys.
put up to the higher court.
Share, a link or something down below, because I would be interested to check it out.
Have their own Chamber of Representatives, a Senate, and also have an executive mirrored after their president. In Europe, if there was any state that was above the countries that made it up, it would have to be modeled from those very different countries beneath it, rather than serving as a model for the countries below it. This is an important difference because it means that any kind of European government would have to balance parliamentary systems with presidential republics, federal states with unitary ones, and they'll be expected to create a system that hopefully pleases each one sufficiently. All in all, although the differences between the two are practically endless and some are near impossible to actually describe, it's still a worthwhile effort to try
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, punishment versus rehabilitation for the prisons.
Oh, yeah.
figure a few out, and also discuss them. In some way, Europe has more breathing room to understand what it wants to be, which is no easy task, because whatever you think Europe is, it can still look across the Atlantic and realize what
Yeah, I said hugging and PB&J and toilets. Some of these are what?
it definitely is not.
There are a lot of differences.
Yeah, anyway, so that was a little bit different than I thought. It was a little bit more political.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
Is fine. I do think with the video like this, it is very broad to just compare Europe to the U.S.
So you kind of picked one topic
No.
of differences.
What I'm saying is because Europe is different countries. It's not one
Yeah.
country. Germany has very different laws than Sweden or Norway
Yeah.
or England. Like, yes, they're part of the European Union, and I think because of that they have like restrictions that countries recognize.
Yeah.
But I think it's mostly for trade and like military reasons. So I think each country still has like the right to set their own laws and everything, obviously.
Well, yeah.
So it's just like it's so broad to be like, oh, Europe, and then compared to the U.S., it's like, and I get why for like a 10-minute video, that's just is what it is.
We are very different from a lot of European countries because a lot of those countries have a lot of similarities with how they do things,
Yeah,
especially like with
the
the
universal
healthcare and the
healthcare.
education and stuff,
Yeah.
and we are just like very different from that, it seems.
I will just throw in also at the end here that it is true that I think the U.S. spends more on education than any country for our per GDP or per.
Is that counting college level stuff? Because I know
Yeah,
we have some
I think
pretty
so.
elite colleges, and those can be.
But what I'm saying is we spend a ton of money. Let me know, guys, down again below in the comments if that's how much you in your country you got your government
Subsidizes
whatever.
the-
If that's how much it costs,
Oh.
because that's how much it costs for the taxpayers. It's $5,000
I feel like it's more than that.
per student. No, yeah, I'm pretty sure we spend more than any other country on education, and we are just so low. I don't
It's not doing us any
I don't
good.
think we come in first on any subject, and it's really sad. Anyway, guys, sorry, it's a long video, I know. Hopefully, we provide some insight on the
You
U.S.
definitely
side
know a
of
little
it.
bit more about this than I do.
On the Europe, I'm not going to try to speak for it, so
Yeah.
it is what it is.
It's just from what our understanding is so far.
I was hoping I would learn a little bit more on the European side, but I guess that's what you guys are for. So comment down below and let us know. Hopefully you guys learned something and enjoyed it. We'll catch you guys next time. As always, please be safe, take care, and look after one another.